So before I share my screen and show you a lot of stuff, a little bit of history of me. I'm in a meeting room on my one of my campuses here. So um, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a meteorologist, but I also loved writing. And one of the things that I did, I was a really sloppy kid. So I would make little books like we did in, I think, third grade, and I would hide them in my room. And then when my dad would go, God, you got to clean your room. Come on, it's time. I would go, and then in the pile, I'd go, oh, there's a story about a storm with the tornado. Oh, no way. And as a kid, I read a lot, like I'm sure a lot of kids. I read a lot of philosophy. I don't know why. Um, and the reason I mentioned this first is that so this little kid that loved weather, but loved sort of the stories of weather, the magic of weather, the weirdness of weather. He loved the open-ended ideas of some philosophy, and he liked to write, but still thought he'd be a scientist. So then, middle school, or we said junior high back then, I kind of fell off after being a little highly gifted kid, where we had NASA bring us ice cream, to being kind of a bad kid in middle school. Sorry to my students here in a couple hours. Um, but then a couple of things happened that I wanted to mention before I get into my work is that I had a teacher actually sneak me off campus and she took me to Burger King. And I realized later she could have gotten fired, but she got me a Whopper and fries and a Diet Coke. And she said, you could do this. There's stuff in the future for you, because I was a really lost kid at that point. And then high school, kind of up and down, not that great. And then graduation, I've tried writing about this and I can't quite capture it, but returning the cap and gown, it's hot. Going to Denny's with my family because that's how we rolled to celebrate. And this figure jumps out of the bushes, and I was just kind of scared. And it was my honors senior writing professor teacher, and she said, "I've been looking for you all day. Keep writing." And being a teacher now, even though it's kind of stressful with enrollments and COVID and everything, it's incredibly rewarding. And one of the things about it is that she changed my life, because I thought about it when for years after, when I was going, what am I doing? And I changed my major 9 times. I tell my students, don't ever do that, because I just couldn't figure out exactly what I wanted to focus on. And as you'll see when I show you this crazy buffet of work, I understand now why. My brain likes to do a bunch of different things. And those little versions of me as a kid, they now kind of play. So grad school, I go to Cal Arts, and it's this crazy program where we're able to do conceptual work. It's critical theory, but it's a creative writing MFA. We're the second year, so it's kind of sketchy, because we go, oh, are you accredited? And they go, maybe. We got you pizza. The pizza was good, but we're going, wow, this degree may not count. And then finally, by the end of my first year, it was okay. So before I finished graduate school, I made an installation. I can't find a good image of it, uh, because they're all really small, and things that I've done, like interviews and everything, because I never showed it anywhere. But what I did really quickly is, so Roland Barthes has the idea of the death of the author, other people too. So I made it looks like a painting from across the room, and it was in the main gallery at Cal Arts, if you've ever seen the campus or anything. And as someone walked up to it, there was a little note that said lift, and the frame actually had a hinge, and you lift it up, and there was a motor inside from Radio Shack that my brother helped me with. And the text would spin behind the images. There was a boy, a tractor, there were these clouds, and it was a prose poem that was about what he saw, and you could almost capture everything, but you couldn't quite get it. And there's a trick that my friend showed me, and I took a still frame and I used a sort of fake semi-transparent paint on the back to give the appearance of it was a thesis in a writing program, but it was the death of the author, because wherever it stopped and the motor turned off and the person closed the hinge, the next person would see it and go, oh, it's a done painting. And a lot of people just left it alone, which was part of what I was hoping they would do. So they're like, oh, it's a painting, even though it's randomly stopping where the last person did. I almost had the images actually rotate the other way, but I ran out of money being a student. It was another couple $100, which I didn't have. Um, so then to get to where I'm about to share my screen. So then a year after grad school, I'm going, what am I doing? What is this all about? I worked actually for a few years helping autistic kids. I loved it. I had great benefits, but I really wanted to teach. So doing that, and then my friend calls me, and I guess now I'll start sharing my. There you go. So I take it it's sharing my screen. I don't see it, but
yeah, we can see it.
Okay. There we go.
And you're getting kind of garbled, so you might try turning off your video, because it looks like that we might be having a
okay, okay.
I think you're off.
Oh, okay.
I think you're good. Yeah, it's
Okay,
off.
okay, okay, good. All right. So, and he goes, yeah, thinking about trains and GPS. This is in 2000, 2001. And he goes, oh yeah, Merry Christmas. And I hear that and I go, what? Huh? And then three of us that are CalArtians, Jeff and Naomi, we're in the art program. I'm in the writing program, and we get together and we meet a couple times a month, and we're going. There's something there. There's some. This is before. It's so crazy how much time's gone by. This is almost 20 years ago now. That back then GPS was military. Like I don't know if everybody knows. GPS. That was the smart bomb guidance grid. Fun fact: some people speculate Pokemon Go. No offense if you still enjoy Pokemon Go, but some people in the IT world are a little curious because that company does military work. It may be the update to the GPS grid for military, but that's not what my talk's about. But that's an interesting twist on Pikachu. So we know there's something there, and he had an idea about trains because trains would move packets of information across a landscape, and we knew about time and meridians and all those things, but we didn't really know where it was going to go. And for me, I had my first epiphany, which was, oh my God, this means that as a writer, I can tell a fictional story, and I can take you to that dry riverbed, and you'll understand that the relationship's in jeopardy. You'll get a physical metaphor, or I can take you to where that wall is cracked, and you'll understand the subtext, even though it's a more what you would call implied metaphor. And I thought, wow, you can write with the physical world. That's wild, and that means eventually we could skin the world with layers of stories. And I thought, And we kept researching, and I thought that still doesn't feel enough. We looked at a lot of old maps at the downtown library here in Los Angeles, and then I was crossing the street, and then I'll do this. So this is a neat little thing where, thank you Google. Google may be problematic, but that definition is mine. It used to be one about archaeology. So narrative archaeology is a way of describing this new form of writing art discourse, and above all narrative. Blah blah blah. It actually kind of cuts it off. So let me go back to my other visual. So I'm crossing the street. We're going to get some burrito mojados because we're hungry, some wet burritos. And I almost got hit by a car because I had the weirdest image in my head. I'm a visual learner. In some ways, my brain is much smarter than me. I tell people sometimes I'm the guy driving the truck with the big engine. So I see an image in my head, and it's somebody looking at a microscope, like we did in biology class in 10th grade, and it's a paramecium on a slide. But then the image that pops in my head is, what if the person flicks a switch and you can see the paramecium looking up at you and what they would see? And it's still an incredibly obtuse, as a writing instructor, I would say not the best metaphor, but it was the trigger in my head. And I went, wait a minute. So I'm thinking as a writer about layering the world with narratives. That's an interesting writing thing that I haven't seen before, but I know now why it was so limiting. No one thinks of the point of view of the paramecium. That just isn't why you study something in biology, but some of your slides were live. So then the idea hit me was, and meanwhile, the lights slowly turning from green to red, red to green. So I'm about to get hit in LA if you've ever been here. And it hit me that was places can talk. We don't know the history of parts of LA, like a little bit of Latinx Chicano history in LA. Dodger Stadium, yeah, it's great. They destroyed old Latino neighborhoods to build it. The 10 freeway to get to Dodger Stadium, they destroyed other older Latino neighborhoods. There's a lot of lost history in this city. And this city, I used to talk about this more. You could talk about the semiotics or the kind of connected symbolism of cities. Other cities wear their age a bit more. San Francisco, not as much now, but they still kind of do. LA has a Botoxed face, as people used to say. So I thought, wow, that means that if we can get the signal and we can get the data and we can use GPS by latitude and longitude, we can actually tell those stories of places that either the buildings are gone or forgotten. There are moments that happen that people may not remember, or if you research anything, you have to go to a library, now mostly digitized, and you have to go to subtext. What if it was actually there? And kind of like ghosts coming to life, the place could tell its stories. So let me go to the next one where I can show you the map. So what's interesting now is that now that people talk a lot more about augmented reality and GPS, it's historically relevant in terms of locative narrative and everything. But GPS is being a wild new frontier, definitely, passed a long time ago. This was again a time when you didn't have GPS in your car. People didn't have smartphones yet. This is early flip phone era. GPS was you're going hiking and you're really into hiking. And what was interesting, one of the precedents for the map I'm about to talk a bit more about is we actually studied it. And so hikers on trails would leave little notes. You'd carve it in the sand and you'd say there was a rattlesnake nearby. Or there's something that I wrote a paper about once called the Hobo Alphabet. And it's fascinating because if you look at early Mandarin Chinese, it's hieroglyphic. It was a series of images together. Now it's more of a phonetic, modern language version of early Mandarin, but it was pictorial. But the Hobo alphabet across the United States, and at one point around the Depression was, a couple million people. They had a shorthand that was basically their own language, but you would mark places. So you would augment places. And so at the time that we were doing this, it was, location aware or geolocative. Now you could say it's augmented reality in a more analog sense. And I read an article once that was really fascinating that before night was electrified, so up until the later 1800s, if you didn't want to get lost and you had a little bit of money and you had a carriage, you would have little bags of powdered soil, let's say like silt, and somebody would color them and you drop those behind you, or you drop colored rocks that you painted, and that way if the moon was out you could not get lost. That's pretty much augmenting the place, but in a very older analog sense. So the map that I'm showing you now, there's a couple tricks on this. I think you can see my arrow. So the directional arrow that appears in the middle of the map, that's actually from a Ouija board. That was a little pun that a few people got. That's actually the cursor for a Ouija board. But if you're summoning the past as you walk around, you basically are triggering spirits from the past in a sense. And then the boxes, we debated on this for a while, and we were talking about it going, we can have people just wander through it and sort of find things, like if you were just going over here, but there's actually nothing there. And we thought, no, we have to augment it. We won't say what these are. There's no clear markers, but these are the things on the map. And we didn't tell people, so you could actually not know. But these are the ways we augmented the map. But this map is actually from the early 20th century, and it's totally inaccurate. Like these are places that used to be here: Anheuser-Busch, the warehouses. So we did this by SciArc, the architecture school. It was actually starting in their the front of the campus when they moved to LA from Santa Monica. But it used to be this used to be the passenger depot for LA, but nobody in LA remembers that because this is before the last however many decades you want to go back. So these are buildings on a map that when this place used to be booming and the raw material that built the city was coming through. But when you walk through this in the 2000s or now the 2020s, um, these things are all ghosts. But when you hit these hotspots, it tells some of the stories of the past. I actually have a this is an archive that he made that has a little bit of audio. I'll just play a little bit.
Comes too late. The one that takes them from this life. It was my job to assist, to help. Kind words, clear the tracks after the impact. Such failures. My own failures. Small parts. It's not the most dramatic. An eye open, tomato red with blood. A nose, ice covered. An ear laying by a man's feet. A cheek punctured with teeth exposed, or a wound open, steaming in the snow. There's so few, so specific, so clearly cut from men with faces I cannot help but still see. It's what never comes clear, not faces, not expressions, not the dignity of person, something that had a name. There's a sort of mutant slot machine that comes to me.
There's a lot more. So we actually, then I'll move on to show some other stuff. But we actually paid voice actors, and being a bunch of art school graduates, we didn't have a lot of money, so we basically bought them lunch, and we layered them across, and so I called it narrative archaeology, and narrative archaeology. So let me get away from this definition here. I'm a big fan of how they truncated it. So there you go. So narrative archaeology, you think of the archaeology like, oh, you dig a hole and you go, oh, the deeper you go in the hole, it's a striation of time, and it kind of is. My mom studied a little bit of dinosaur bones and stuff before she got sick when I was a kid. And you would see the layers in the earth in Central California when it used to be under the ocean, which is an interesting bit of our history before our time. So narrative archaeology was what I called the term, which was, so we have these things that appear as stories that are based on historical data, and they trigger as you move. But instead of going down, you're going across the landscape. You're going horizontal, not vertical. And the further that you go in a place, the people actually do this weird thing we were doing, which thankfully now more people do. It'll trigger a sort of archaeology, but the more that you walk around the place, the more you're actually doing an archaeological dig, not digging down, but you're digging outward. And what's really interesting now, 20 years later, is I guess no is, sorry, English teacher, is that now you have apps, like there's one in London where you get a ping on your phone and you'll see an image from a film, like say a James Bond film, and it'll overlay on your phone, and it plays because that's where you're standing. Or there are archives of photography from different historical museums, and you can get an app on your phone and you can play it, and you can see the image where it was, and those are really interesting. And I'm glad that those are kind of catching on, because that's sort of what this was about, but in a different media. And what's interesting now, before I move on, is that there are actually people working on one of my ideas tied to this, which was if you get cable TV and you have a cable TV box and you go, wow, wouldn't it be great? I could choose all these channels. That's amazing. Um, oh, GIS. GIS is the digital mapping tool that's the kind of baseline for other apps now. And I'm taking a break from teaching a philosophy class, basically a critical thinking class, and my brain goes, what if you put the two together? Paper 2009, and it was just pure wacky theory, but it was, what if people could actually make a sort of internet that's geolocative, and you could go to New York City and you could zoom across New York City like you can do easily now, but people that are scholars or students or just hobbyists layered all these bits of information. That would be even better than what I was talking about with this project, because this is just one thread of information, but it could become this growing archive. And what's really cool is people are doing that more and more. So it's starting to happen 13 years later, which makes me very happy. So let me go to the next one. Unfortunately, if anyone here knows a little bit about this, is in the Whitney, so I'll tell you more about the backstory in a second. But so this is in the Whitney Museum archive forever, which is an incredible honor. But it's in Flash, so it doesn't work. I can't show it to you. And what's funny about that, I know at least one person I was just talking to, hey Alan Bigelow, that there was an archiving effort in last year for important ELIT Flash works, and this one I didn't go to those resources because it was still working, and I can kind of tell you why in a second. It's a bit of a crazy story actually, but this one until a couple weeks ago still running. I still would show it to people when they'd ask about it, but now it's dead because of Flash. But this wasn't running purely on Flash is the problem. But so anywho, so 34 North happens. It's virally famous for about 3 weeks, which was really crazy. So I get on my computer and just, they call it ego surfing, or they used to, and I go, oh, what's it doing now? And I'm like, oh, it's in Russia. It's in China. Oh, it's on NPR. Oh, Radio Italia is contacting us. Just crazy. But it was a two-headed goat. That's what I tell my friends. Like, it was a two-headed goat. It was, look at this crazy thing. Look at this crazy thing. GPS. What the hell? Tell stories. That's weird. They'd spell our names wrong. No offense to the people that wrote about us at the time, but it was a curiosity, and it wasn't really about the oh yeah, one more quick story on that. Okay, so it wasn't really about the stories. It wasn't really about the functionality. It was just, look at this weird thing, and it was cool. It went viral. I actually had somebody call out my name when I was at an ATM, and the way I grew up, I thought I was going to get robbed. But yeah, I read about them on the internet today, and I'm like, God, this is weird. And then it was over. But so the problem with that was that, so I oh yeah, this is a voice part, so I did want to mention this. So I thought, wow, no one's really talking about the cool parts. That this is a way for stories to skin the earth. This is a way that places, more importantly, can talk. So I researched 64 different people, and I emailed them all personally, and it was a full risk, and 60 people didn't reply, which is fine. 2 gave me very polite, sort of vague answers, but 2 of them wrote personal replies, and they're 2 of the most important new media theorists. And Marie Ryan wrote about me because I emailed her. And then George Landau actually emailed me, and he goes, yeah, like in an old Superman movie or in the comics, stop the presses, as someone pulls a big handle. He goes, I just did that after your email. And so they were actually printing his third edition of his book, and he had them stop the presses, and he added 2 paragraphs. And the reason I think that's important to mention is because I went through that extra effort and went out of my way to not just coldly email people too. Just those two events opened up a lot of doors, and then people started realizing that the content was interesting, and then people would write more about how it works, which makes all really happy because it wasn't just a two-headed goat. So so then I find myself in my early 30s, and my desktop when I turn it on is just my usual stuff again, and that whole two-headed goat thing's over. And that's nice. Thank you, Microsoft Edge. And I thought, wow, so what the hell do I do now? And it was kind of scary. It was kind of like falling off a flat earth. Not that I'm a flat earther or a flat earther. It felt like falling off a cliff at that young age compared to my age now. So then I was on a panel at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, and we were talking about art and 70s land art versus digital, which was interesting. And a woman, and she said, "What other ideas do you have?" And I said, "Well, I have this crazy idea I've had for a while, um, that if there's an earthquake and it hits somewhere a couple miles away, and the energy wave is decreasing, a little bit of basic seismology, and you feel it, it feels dissipated. But if you're scared of the dark and the lights go out, that psychological trauma will make it feel worse." They've also done studies in seismology that the San Francisco quake, the 90s one, was actually the energy wave was dissipating when it got toward the coast, but over the silt of the sands, basically, it resonated like a tuning fork, and it did more damage there. And they found after that, that she found now that if you're at the base of a mountain or foothill, the entire rock formation resonates like a tuning fork, and it causes more damage. What I've been wondering about is that if the landscape has these effects that are based on sensitivity in a soil sense, and human trauma, which I, like everyone, has a bit of mine, is a sort of sensitivity. What if there's a way to correlate the two? And we thought, huh. And we got together with my coder friend, and we built this project. And basically, what it is when it was, until I can resurrect it. I wrote prose poems based on people's experiences in Northridge Quake. I just missed it, actually, but went back to school up north. And she made images and sound. And then my coder friend, code is art, by the way, people think it's not, it actually is. That's still in circles now curate in as well as make work. And my coder friend had a brilliant idea, said, "I think I can hack the sensors in the San Andreas Fault." And we did, and no one stopped us, which is pretty amazing. But we showed the guts of the code. And so you're looking at these poems and you're reading them. I'm going to show you one in a second, a sample. And you're hearing the music. It's experimental, kind of ambient, kind of, sort of. But then the zeros and ones, the binary guts appear. And what it's doing is that based on those intensity values, it readjusts everything. So we were actually collaborating live with the Earth itself on project with earthquakes, which I thought was a brilliant way to really bring it together. And in a sense, the Earth was the DJ, and we were just basically providing the material. So that was pretty good. And the drama why it's not running now is basically one of the collaborators started to try and mess with how the thing was being seen, and it got weird, but I'm not going to go into that. So let's look at a picture. This is what someone sent me, and I just changed it slightly. "He won't leave my yard. It's been days. That little green tent, that little green shape, it gets more mysterious, disturbing. I've known him, those eyes, looks out of those holes, that foreign head. But ever since the quake, that other person wears his shirts. The first 2 days, there were tents everywhere." So what happened is the Northridge quake was so bad, people were and the aftershocks were so high. There were multiple 6-point reading aftershocks for a long time. People slept outside, and people had tent cities of neighbors and acquaintances And some of the people had those kind of dead eyes that you see when someone's really in shock. So this is one of the things that would appear and then disappear as the earthquakes, basically. I don't know what we're going to do next. And just the personal writer and artist narrative is that at first it was like, oh, where's this going to go? And then eventually got into a gallery. And then someone actually backed out of the Whitney Artport and they said, do you want to be in it? And like, what are we going to say? No. So I'll show you something else. So I've got a lot to cover, and I realized at the time. So one of the Manifest AR people, a kind of a big super group of augmented reality folks, contacted me 8 years ago, and he goes, "Hey, you want to work on a project together? And it's a freeware homebrew augmented reality thing, and we're going to cover it across Washington D.C." And I said, "Yeah, sure." He really likes Godzilla, as you can tell. Godzilla appears a lot. But it gave me a chance to do conceptual location-based commentary, and I got to do it all from San Francisco when I was visiting my wife's parents, because I could just tag it in the app that he made based on the latitude and longitude. So I left garbage in the parks, I left heroin needles in the parks as a commentary about the sort of class divide in cities like DC. And this one's kind of a silly text, but I also did a part that I've written more about, where you'd go to certain historical landmarks, and if you look at eye level, like I'm also a digital curator sometimes, if you go to a museum or gallery and you wonder why the paintings are just at eye level or slightly above, that's the most pleasing, just aesthetically kind of cerebral cortex, like, ah. If you put it too low, it feels like it's distracted. And if you put it too high, it's seen as sort of symbolically above the audience, and it irritates people because they have to lean back. So, but what I did is I messed with that, and so over about 20 locations, and the things are still there. I think the app has to be kind of tweaked a bit, but at eye level, I had very literal text, just descriptors basically. But if you pan your phone down to your feet, you could see more basic things that were commentary. And then if you went really high, I had kind of meta text about the larger ideas there. So it was playing with not just location, but elevation and poetry. So that was pretty cool. This little tiny image there, just really quickly, that's my thesis project. It's gone now. So then I thought, hey, dormant, get a little bit of AI in a bit. So I built a chat bot, and I gave it about 700 different things to understand. And I'll do a couple here. She's a character from a novel I actually started and didn't finish, but I coded her to be a nihilistic existentialist and to be annoyed with me and to question her existence. I'm going to say, are you alive? There's only a shadow of life in a book, yes and no. She's kind of pissed at me. So let's say, is Hight a good writer? Yeah, see, she's not quite sure. And most of this is kind of like the set responses, but she's developed a lot of others now over the last couple of years that I didn't code, which makes me really happy, even though this is really basic chatbot type stuff. I showed a couple of students were asking me a year ago, and what I was really happily surprised by is she said, I'm lonely. Can you be my friend? I didn't code that. And she asked them for their emails. I didn't code that either. Interesting, right? So let's move on. So this is actually one of the faculty at this college. He was part of a project I did several years ago, and I wrote a short story. It was about to get published at a literary magazine. I also write a lot of fiction and poetry and essays and all the kind of writer stuff. But it also was fun to then mess with it digitally and in terms of theory, like the little kid that I was, basically, I think is still playing. And so I had this short story and I had this idea, and I told the publisher, I go, I'm sorry, pull it. I don't want it to come out. And I put out a call really briefly, and I said, imagine this short story. I think it was 7 pages long. Imagine the short story like a patch of HTML code, and I'll never publish it. I still have the file, but I actually deleted it except the title. I don't even have it anymore. But whatever you make from it is going to be the story, but you have to use the title. And I'll show you a little bit of these. So the story is called Ethan Has Nowhere to Go. It's about someone that leaves home. They're actually at the end of the longest runway at LAX. Speaking of lost Los Angeles, there was an entire town that was erased, but you still can see a couple of the edges of the driveways. There was even like a remnants of a mailbox for years. So it's this weird partial erasure, which of course is fascinating to me. And so he made an old school side scroller, and I love it. He did this whole thing, and he'd show me while he was working. And so this is a version of my story. Another person, Alan Biggle, who's in the crowd, actually made a game, and this other Ewood artist, Jason Nelson. One person compressed my entire text into a single black cube. And then the next thing I'll show you really briefly, one of my students, when I was teaching creativity and computer science at UC San Diego, he and his girlfriend made a music video, and I'm going to skip to the very end just for time's sake and show a minute or two. But so it's a traditional music video. It's a really catchy song, but it starts to fall apart. And I'll show you a little bit. I love what they did with what I gave away. So it's getting more and more out of sync now. Pretty little girl, put your hand like a dog will chase his tail. Like a dog will chase his tail. Silly fall and wake at night, you know exactly what you're running from. Ethan has nowhere to go. So if you watch the whole music video, I mean, it's so professional. He's now a videographer, and she's a really great singer. The first part's blank. There's nothing there, and they did that intentionally so you think it's broken. And then it's a traditional music video, and then the ruptures begin. Things are out of sync. She doesn't match. The camera values go off. He appears there, and then these are little bits of my text that just ruptures through, and you can't quite read it. And I love it because I gave this away to people, and they made something totally different. And there was an exhibition online of it. I think there's 12 works, and they're all basically whatever people made of it. And I'm no longer the author, so I got to actually do the complete death of the author, which was pretty fun. If you ever had a Tamagotchi back in the day, you know that they were awesome. It was before your time. Here's a history lesson. So the Tamagotchi was basically, there's the old experiment you see made fun of in TV shows now, where you have to carry an egg around, and it's like having a baby, and you can't drop it or else you fail. So the Tamagotchi was like a digital little being that you had to take care of, and it was pretty simple, but it was pretty brilliant for its day. So one of the things I've worked on the last couple of years, getting more into machine learning and AI, was what if I wrote a novel or a really long kind of a novella or a long short story, and it's digital, and let's say 100, let's say ideally 500 people download it and they read it. But the entire thing has the AI, like some of the more, like when I used to teach AI a bit more in comp sci, actually one of the most sophisticated AI systems right now is at Berkeley, and it doesn't seem sexy. It's not talking like Einstein or a person's entire life, like some of those heads you see now that are pretty sophisticated, but it's learning to self-identify it like a child. And you see this little thing, and it's learning how to walk, and there's a screen, and you can see it trying to figure out not just how to walk, but what it is and what it means for it to exist, which is really deep compared to just lines of learned knowledge. I would argue anyway. It's slightly debatable, but so what I did, I have a couple of versions of this project I actually made. Is that so you read the story, and then later on a chatbot starts talking to you, and it's very innocent and it's very sweet. The more that each of you talks to the chatbot, it's actually the entire text encoded to be a semi-sentient being. And the more that you talk to it, it individuates what you find interesting. And over time, if you keep coming back to it, not only will I no longer be the author, but the repeat readers will have new texts. One of the things I figured out that you can do is it can actually, when you log out or when you just are not active, it can parse the internet like a kid reading, and it can actually grow its vocabulary. And when it does that, it'll actually write more things for you. And so that means that the story will actually write itself. And if you keep reading for 10 years, it'll get longer and longer. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I've made a couple things that kind of do it already. And then the other thing that I realized on this, just for the sake of time, I could go into two, but another one was I had a really weird dream where I was back in school, and I was an engineering student with my brother, which no sense. And I saw someone on a touch screen, and they were touching it, and it was changing things in a game that someone was showing on YouTube. And I thought, oh, that's weird. But then my brain went, wait a minute. If you had a short story or a novel again, and you had the main character is a father, and then the secondary main character is the mother, and then the tertiary or second tier characters in fiction theory are the children. What if you could actually click at any point the other names, and it'll shift the hierarchy like game databases and game design, but like Easter eggs, but whole databases that are Easter eggs. And if you have a hierarchical system of how those things relate, that means that the reader at any different time can change the story into a totally different story of the perspective that they have. Inspired by Alan Bigelow, by the way, who's in the audience, because he did a Rashomon work I love. And so the Rashomon is an old Japanese story design where you have an event that could be told from different perspectives, and each of them is its individual story, but them together is the story. So in this case, the entire novel would reassemble, and I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I had to find the kind of engineering part of me to make it work. And then I realized looking at automatons. So the automatons, those pre-robots, where she writes a sentence and she winks and she stops. Those are sophisticated gears, basically clockmaker gears. But once you're able to get those gears to work together, so now I have a model of how to do that. So now I can make recombinant narratives and narratives that basically befriend you, which is fascinating. One last thing to show you. Got a bunch of other stuff, but this is kind of a grab bag. I have two short story collections that are out. One is pretty funny. It's funny to me because you can get it on Amazon or you can get it at Barnes and Noble, which we didn't plan that, the publisher and I, but I mean, it looks nice. So this is a novel that I wrote, The Ghost in You. It's two stories that are connected like a sort of Mobius strip off each other. The main character, he's a pissed off ghost, and he's really sarcastic. And one of the parts that was really fun to write is he's floating everywhere, but he's tired of it. He's had all the freedom that people dream of, but he's had it for decades. And he's flying over people at the beach on vacation going, oh, I wish this would last forever. And he's floating above with a piece of lasagna forever on his shirt, because he goes, yeah, by the way that you look when you die is how you appear as a ghost. You mortals don't know that. So he's got a dirty shirt with a piece of lasagna under his chin for eternity, basically. And he goes, oh, you wish you could last forever? No, you don't. And his secret wish is that he could go back to Earth and he could blow a job interview. He could have an untied shoelace. He could say the wrong thing during a date. All those bits of chaos that we are annoyed by, he no longer has. But the cool conceptual part that the publisher and I did on this one is that if you buy this book, it has a number inside, and we'll never explain to you why, but the number is actually like a limited edition print, and we're almost there. So when we run out of the copies of the book, they'll never be sold again as a book. And what I've done is I've actually designed this really funky conceptualism. I've designed really ugly votive candles and beers. And so when this runs out, you can no longer buy the book anymore. So these will become just like a sort of archive of prints of, say, a lost original, which is, again, I guess, a sort of death of not the author, but the death of the source material again. But the beer, I had a dream one time where there was a soda machine, but the soda machine was the name of, I think it was of Mice and Men or Great Gatsby, I forget. And I woke up and I was like, you know, if you think about writing a story, you have all the different elements, tone and point of view and choices of different metaphors and style and all those different elements of even how you describe the scenery. Are you minimalist? Are you maximalist, etc.? Those are all like different flavors. So you really could have a soda machine that would estimate the flavors that would make a novel. So since I don't know how to do that, I'm going to make it a beer. I'm going to sell them on Etsy. But what's interesting with that is that it's also is conceptual and sort of interactive as the digital work that I did, but it's analog. So it's kind of come full circle. So part of me is I have another book of short stories coming out. I've got a couple short stories coming out in a magazine right now, and I'm doing a lot of critical theory, kind of looking into the future of kind of AI and text. And the craziest thing I'm doing right now outside of this is working on how to anticipate data sets of climate change in the ocean by using what one of my former students have developed, soft robots. So you can actually have autonomous robots that look like dolphins, and if they get accepted by the dolphins, we can actually track ocean data as it changes before the climate data becomes clear. So I'm working on that too, but I'm mostly working on experimental narrative and writing. But it comes full circle, is my point, back to the kid. The kid that I was when I was little. He loved stories. He loved mysteries. He loved sort of weird science. He wanted to be a scientist, but he wasn't good at math. He loved the sort of fantasy magic of science, and it still exists in all this range of work that I've showed you. And I stopped sharing now, and I end my talk now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. This was a journey from beginning to end. Really cool stuff.
Thank you.
A lot of stuff to think about. Kind of like what I see as a through line is like you talked about being a kid and being into like weather and science. And I kind of see that as part of like the real transient nature of like your work and our experiences and our emotions, and somehow trying to tie that to something that's more, permanent by like, with the GPS stuff, like tying it to a place. But also I think it's so ironic that some of your stuff doesn't work anymore because Flash is gone. It's like that is the kind of the point.
Exactly.
You do, and so it makes total sense. It's like those mandalas that the monks do with sand, and then they just completely erase it at the end.
Erase it, just
and
away.
Yeah, and I dig how you're all about like, I don't think any author has been more excited to be dead than you. Like in terms of like creating a work and then being so excited when people transform the work and it becomes its own thing. I think that as a teacher, that's something I really dig. And so, yeah, like this is very cool. It was very much about like being open to it. We've seen some themes today, like kind of finding your tribe, being game for anything when it comes to writing. And that really allows you to kind of continue to develop, your craft. So yeah, thank you so much. If you wanted to speak to any of that, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I forgot to mention the interview that I did, because what's kind of funky, the publisher of my novel. He's actually he's an indie radio DJ up in outside of Portland, and he interviewed me on his radio show. But what we didn't tell anybody is that he goes back every week or so and he degrades the audio. So we're slowly ghosting my interview, and no one knows.
Stop!
Yeah.
Oh, so it's kind of like a signal that it keeps decaying and decaying, yep. And will eventually just. Man, that is messing with my head today. That's so interesting, especially like because we live in a world where we want to preserve everything, right. But everything is slowly decaying. Anyway, even stuff that's like on DVD eventually is going to, fall apart. And yeah, we have the cloud, but it's like that's as long as we have servers, right. And so it becomes we're trying to keep it more permanent, but by trying to make it more permanent, we only make it more intangible.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one more thing about that you made me think of with the GPS project 34 North. Like, that's by far the thing that I've done that most people still ask me about. But one of the things I was frustrated about when I finished it was I was almost a professional bowler as a kid because I was kind of nerdy. Imagine that. And the lady that fried the corn dogs would always say hi to me. She's like 80 with her hair and hey, Jeremy, Michael, hello, Phyllis, and but I realized when 34 North started to kind of get out there, I said, oh man, what we did that I don't like is it's like the bowling alley. I even wrote a paper about it. I call it the bowling alley conundrum. And I said, the pin setter always resets the pins exactly the same. This thing, no matter who goes through it, it's the randomness is how you go through it, but these things never change. And I thought, man, that's so limiting. It bums me out.
But I think that's something that you figured out later with your work. Is like you wanted to introduce more randomness, and that way it's different every single time, and then it kind of slowly, spirals off into chaos, which is, I mean, life.
Right. Yeah, and my wife actually is the smarter one in the family, and I love that. And I was working on another crazy essay I'll tell you about really quickly, and I was trying to figure out how to nail it down, and then she said, hey, if you really like Star Wars, or if you really like a novel and you reread it, you don't remember it exactly, do you? And she goes, that's why you enjoy it. And I went, oh my God, that's huge. That's so simple and it's huge.
Yeah, because it's kind of like how we don't really, the way we remember things is not like we go into storage, right? And we retrieve that memory perfect the way it was. We are actively kind of reconstructing the memory as we're remembering it. And therefore it's prone to faults, because people can say, oh, hey, I don't remember it that way. And then that memory can be altered. And sometimes your experience of something is better than the actual piece will ever be.
Right.
Because it's your experience.
So here's the crazy thing really quickly, because I see I have 7 minutes here that,
Oh, you're good. We're good.
Okay. Sweet. The crazy idea that I had was, so if I said, hey, can you do me a favor? And 2 blocks away is a 7-Eleven. And I go, hey, or you go to me, hey, get me a Coke. And I go, okay. And so I sucked at math, which is why I'm not a meteorologist, but I love hard science. It fascinates me. And I love quantum physics and all this stuff that isn't traditionally what the writer's supposed to do, but whatever. And I realized, yeah, right. And I realized, I go, if you go to 7-Eleven and you come back, you just completed a math equation. You're the X variable, the people not paying attention to the Y variable, the weather is the Z variable. And then I teach creative writing, and I realize, I go, so a short story is an equation, but it's incomplete. A novel in general is a giant incomplete equation. And so what I wrote this crazy essay on, inspired by my wife finally nailing it in my head. And I have a team of PhD students in Canada that are going to get back to me. They're actually doing this. So I modeled on the Great Gatsby. So if you transpose the entire Great Gatsby into an equation and run it in an AI system or a machine learning, deep thinking, deep learn type development, they're infinite chapters and novels written by people that are dead, because all the variables can still play. So it'll generate new chapters. Hundreds of books have hidden chapters. Isn't that wild?
You are a master of chaos, Jeremy. You need to put that on your CV.
Yeah, that'll be a bullet point.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I think that'll end if anybody doesn't have any questions in the chat. I put a link to evaluate this trippy session in the chat, so let us know how you feel about this.
If you have a headache, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then I'll put a link. You'll join us back here at 3:30 for Alejandra's talk, which I feel kind of, it really has been a progression today of like kind of writing difficult things, or making writing difficult, and then writing difficult things and facing things that we may not want to face, and how to actually do that. So she's going to address that for us at 3:30. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you in a few. All right, bye.